My name is Walter Hensley, and I'm 61 years old, and I'm recording this from a one-bedroom apartment in Billings, Montana that I rent for $640 a month. And I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. 3 years ago, I owned a house outright in Bozeman. I had $412,000 in retirement accounts. I had a pickup truck paid off. I had 2 grown daughters who called me on Sundays, and I had a plan to retire at 63 and spend my winters somewhere warm. Today, I have none of those things. I lost all of it. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of the life I spent 40 years building. I lost it to a woman in the Philippines, whose real name I still don't know, in a city I'd never heard of before I turned 58. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at 2 in the morning 3 years after it ended, is that I saw every red flag. I saw every single one. And I ignored every single one. Because I wanted what she was selling more than I wanted the life I already had. My name is Walter Hensley, and this is the story of how I walked into a bar in Angeles City as a successful retired engineer and walked out 3 years later as a man who had to borrow money from his younger brother to pay for the plane ticket home. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. I need to start before the Philippines. I need to start in Bozeman, Montana, because you can't understand how a man like me ended up where I ended up if you don't understand the specific emptiness I was carrying when I got on that plane. I was an electrical engineer. I worked for the same power utility for 34 years. Starting as a field technician and ending as a senior project manager. I was good at my job. I was methodical. I was the kind of man who kept spreadsheets of his own household expenses and balanced them to the penny every month. I was married to Diane for 26 years, and Diane died of pancreatic cancer when I was 55. She was diagnosed in April and she was gone by November. 7 months. That was it. 26 years of marriage and then 7 months, and then a house that was too quiet to sleep in. My daughters Rebecca and Sarah were both grown and out of the house by then. Rebecca with her own family in Denver and Sarah finishing her master's degree in Seattle. They flew home for the funeral, and they stayed for a week afterward, and then they went back to their lives, which is what grown daughters are supposed to do. And I was alone in a 4-bedroom house with Diane's clothes still in the closet, and Diane's half-read book still on the nightstand, and Diane's coffee mug still in the dish rack where she'd put it the morning before the ambulance came. I didn't date for 3 years. I couldn't even think about it. The grief counselor I saw for a while said I was stuck, said I needed to re-engage with life, said there was no shame in wanting companionship again. But the idea of sitting across from a woman at a restaurant in Bozeman felt like a betrayal of something I couldn't name. So I didn't. I worked. I retired at 58 with a pension and a healthy 401k. I maintained the house. I took the truck out on weekends. I visited my daughters on holidays, and I was, by any external measure, fine. I was not fine. I was a man waiting for something to happen to him because he couldn't figure out how to make anything happen for himself. The something that happened was a retirement party for an old colleague named Dale. Dale had been an engineer at the same utility for about as long as I had, and when he retired, his wife threw him a party at their place out past Belgrade. And I went because Dale and I had worked on a substation project together in the 1990s that nearly killed both of us, and we'd stayed in touch ever since. At the party, there was a man named Marty, a friend of Dale's from somewhere back in his Air Force days, and Marty was tan in a way that nobody in Montana is tan in late autumn, and when I asked him where he'd been, he laughed and said Angeles City, Philippines, and he said it the way a man says Las Vegas when he wants you to ask a follow-up question. I asked the follow-up question. Marty told me about a place he went twice a year, a town in the Philippines where the beer was cheap and the women were young and friendly and the cost of living was so low that a man on a decent pension could live like a king. He told me about bars where you could sit all night and spend $40. He told me about women who would cook for you, clean for you, keep you company, ask nothing except a little help with their families back in the province. He told me he'd been doing it for 11 years, and he'd never met a man who went once and didn't go back. He said it with the specific evangelical conviction of a man who needs other men to validate his life choices. And I didn't recognize that at the time, but I recognize it now. I went home that night and I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and I searched Angeles City, Philippines, and I found the forums. The forums are their own thing, and I need to describe them because they were part of what happened to me. There are entire websites' message boards that have been running since the early 2000s where foreign men write about their trips to Angeles City, Cebu, Manila, Subic Bay. They compare bars. They rate women. They share tactics. They celebrate their conquests and commiserate about their losses. The tone is part locker room, part anthropology lecture, part travel forum. And the overall effect is of a community of men who have made this specific transactional nightlife, into the organizing principle of their lives. I read those forums for 6 hours straight that first night. I read them every night for 2 weeks. And by the end of those 2 weeks, I had convinced myself, using the specific methodical reasoning that had served me well as an engineer for 3.5 decades, that what I needed, what Diane would have wanted for me, I told myself. And this is the lie I told myself that should have been the biggest warning of all, was a trip to the Philippines. I booked it for March. Round trip. Bozeman to Seattle, to Manila, to Clark International, with a 2-week stay at a hotel in Angeles City that the forums described as expat friendly and walking distance to fields. I didn't tell my daughters. I didn't tell my brother. I told Dale, because Dale was the one who'd introduced me to Marty. And Dale gave me a look. I still think about a look that wasn't quite disapproval, but was close to it, and said, "Walt, just be careful with your wallet and your heart," in that order. I laughed at him. I was 58 years old. I'd been a widower for 3 years. I'd managed a 9-figure infrastructure project. I wasn't some kid on spring break. I could handle a bar. I landed at Clark International at 11 in the evening, local time, in the 3rd week of March, 3 years ago. The heat hit me the second I stepped off the jet bridge, this wet, heavy heat that Montana doesn't have and that I wasn't prepared for, even though I'd read about it. The driver my hotel had sent was waiting with a sign that had my name misspelled, and he drove me through Angeles City in a van that smelled like pine, air freshener, and diesel, past streets I couldn't see clearly because the lighting was different from what I was used to. And I remember looking out the window at a stretch of road lined with neon signs in English and thinking, that must be Fields Avenue. I was right. The hotel was clean and basic, a pool, a small restaurant, a lobby with 3 men in their 60s playing cards at 2 in the morning and nodding at me like they knew exactly where I was in the arc of my first night. I unpacked. I showered. I lay on the bed for about an hour trying to sleep. And then I gave up and I walked down to Fields Avenue because I couldn't stand being alone in that room with the hum of the air conditioner and my own thoughts. The first thing I want you to understand about Fields Avenue at 2 in the morning is that it is not subtle. The neon doesn't pretend. The signs say what they are. Bars on both sides of the street, music spilling out of every doorway, women in short dresses standing on the sidewalks or sitting on stools just inside the entrances, men of every Western nationality walking in loose clusters or alone. Older men, 60s, 70s, a few even older, bellies, bald spots, cargo shorts, the uniform of the retiree abroad. I felt, walking down that street for the first time, like I had walked into a place that had been waiting for me, specifically not for a man like me, but for me. With my grief and my money and my carefully calibrated engineer's rationality that I had already, in some part of my brain I wasn't admitting to, decided to leave at the hotel. I walked into the 3rd bar I passed. I don't remember why that one. The music was Western, a song from the 1980s I half recognized, and the doorway wasn't crowded, and I could see the stools at the bar were mostly empty, and I walked in and sat down and ordered a San Miguel because that was the beer the forums had told me to order. The bartender slid it across the bar. I looked around. There were maybe 15 women inside, some sitting together in a booth at the back, some on a small stage in the middle of the room where they were not doing much of anything except standing and talking and occasionally swaying to the music, and some at the bar. I took a long drink of the beer and I thought, now what? The now what answered itself within about 90 seconds. A woman sat down on the stool next to me. She said, "Hi, I'm Joy. What's your name?" I said, "Walter." She said, "Welcome to Angeles, Walter. First time here." I said, "Yes." She said, "You going to buy me a drink?" And I said, "Yes," because that was what the forums had told me to do. And because a woman was sitting next to me in a bar and talking to me for the first time in 3 years. And because I had flown 9,000 miles and spent a significant amount of money to be in exactly this moment, and not buying her a drink would have meant admitting that the whole trip had been a mistake, and I was not yet ready to admit that. Joy was not the woman this story is about. I want to make that clear because the mistake most men make, the mistake I made for a long time, is thinking that the woman who costs you everything is the first woman you meet. She almost never is. Joy was just the first woman. She sat with me for about 40 minutes. She drank 2 drinks that cost me about $15 apiece in lady drink markup. She asked me the standard questions: where I was from, what I did, whether I was married, whether I had kids, and I answered all of them honestly, because I am a fundamentally honest person, and also because the honest answers were part of what I thought I was there for. At some point around the end of the second drink, she touched my arm and asked if I wanted to take her out of the bar, which I understood from the forums to mean paying a bar fine, and I panicked, just a small panic, the specific panic of a man who has been married to the same woman for 26 years and has not had to navigate this kind of transaction in his entire adult life. And I said, "Not tonight, maybe another time, thank you." She said, "Okay, Walter, no problem." And she touched my arm one more time, and she went back to the booth in the back and sat down with the other women and didn't look at me again. I sat at that bar for another hour. I watched. I ordered another San Miguel, and I just watched what was happening around me. I watched the women work the room. I watched the men come in and go out. I watched the way the mama-san, an older woman, maybe my age, sitting at a small table near the door with a notebook, tracked every interaction, made small gestures to certain women, directed traffic without seeming to direct anything. And I thought, with the specific pride of a man who has always considered himself a good observer, I get this. I see how it works. I can handle this. I can be a regular here and enjoy the company and not get taken. This is the exact thought every man has on his first night. This is the thought the entire architecture is designed to produce. You see the machinery, you feel smart for seeing it. And the feeling of smartness is the first layer of the trap, because the feeling of smartness is the thing that prevents you from noticing everything you can't see. The woman this story is about, I met on my 4th night. Her name, the name she gave me, was Annabelle. She went by Belle. I want to tell you what she looked like, because I think it matters. Not because her appearance is what trapped me, but because I want you to understand the specific calibration of what a professional at this looks like. Belle was 31 at the time. She told me she was 26. I found out the real age much later, and I'll get to that. She had shoulder-length black hair and a small, very symmetrical face, and she dressed in a way that was not trying too hard: jeans and a simple blouse, a small gold chain, no heavy makeup. She looked, walking into that bar on my 4th night, like she didn't quite belong there. And that, I understand now, was the product. The appearance of not belonging is the most valuable asset a woman in that economy can have, because it lets the customer tell himself the story he wants to tell, the story that he has found, against all odds, in this specific bar, in this specific town, the one woman who is different. Belle was extremely good at being that woman. I would learn later that it was her full-time job. She sat down next to me, and she didn't immediately ask me to buy her a drink. She asked what I was reading, because I had brought a book with me that night, a biography of Eisenhower that I was about halfway through. She asked who Eisenhower was. I told her. She listened with what seemed like genuine interest, and she asked follow-up questions that seemed intelligent. And after about 20 minutes, she said, "Oh, I should buy my own drink." I don't want you to think I just sat here for that. And she ordered a water. A water. I remember looking at that glass of water in front of her and thinking, this one is different. She wasn't different. She was just better. And the water was a technique. I know this now, because I've since spoken with 3 other men who had nearly identical first encounters with women in that same bar. One of whom met a woman who ordered a water on the first interaction and a Coke Light on the second. Same pattern, different woman. The water was a signal designed to be read by a specific type of man, the type of man who was looking for a woman who didn't seem like she was working. I was exactly that man. I was perfectly that man. I was the ideal customer for that particular sales technique, and Belle had picked me out within, I'd estimate, about 30 seconds of walking into that bar. We talked for 3 hours that first night. She asked me about Montana. She asked me about my wife. I had already mentioned Diane, and she asked about her. And she listened when I talked about the diagnosis and the 7 months and the way the house felt after. And she didn't try to fix any of it or redirect or bring the conversation back to herself. She just listened. At one point, I got emotional, not crying, but close, and she put her hand on mine and didn't say anything. And I thought, this is what I have been missing for 3 years. This exact thing, someone to sit next to and talk to and feel listened to by. I did not bar fine her that night. She didn't ask. When I said I should probably go back to the hotel, she said, "It was really nice to meet you, Walter. I hope I see you again." And she didn't ask for my number, and she didn't suggest anything, and she just went back to the booth. I walked back to my hotel at about 1 in the morning, and I lay in bed, and I thought about her for an hour before I fell asleep. And I thought about her when I woke up the next morning. And at about 4 in the afternoon, I went back to that bar, and she was there. And when she saw me come in, her face lit up in a way that I, at 58 years old, had not had a woman's face light up at me in a very long time. I bar fined her the second night. It cost me about $70. We didn't go anywhere. We went back to my hotel and we talked for another 3 hours, and we had dinner from the hotel restaurant, and we slept in the same bed, but we didn't have sex. Because she said she wasn't like that. She wasn't that kind of girl. She needed to know someone before anything like that could happen, and I believed her. And the next morning, she made me coffee from the little machine in the hotel room, and she asked what I was doing that day. And I said, I didn't really have plans. And she said, can I show you around Angeles? And I said, yes. And that was the beginning of what I thought was a relationship, and what I now understand was a 6-week induction program designed to produce maximum long-term financial commitment from a target who had been identified on the first night as high value. She showed me Angeles. She took me to a market I would never have found on my own. She took me to a small restaurant her cousin ran, she said, where we ate pancit and drank fresh calamansi juice. And the cousin, who may or may not have actually been her cousin, I have no way to know, was warm and welcoming and refused to let us pay. And Belle insisted on slipping money into the cousin's apron pocket when she thought I wasn't looking. I saw her do it. I was meant to see her do it. That was part of the script. She was showing me that she was the kind of woman who supported her family quietly, who wouldn't take charity from her cousin even when it was offered, who had dignity and pride and all the virtues I wanted her to have. She did not ask me for money for almost 3 weeks. 3 weeks. This is the part of the story that I want every man watching this to pay attention to, because the speed at which the request for money came was the single most effective part of the entire operation. And if she had asked on the first or second or even 10th day, I would have known something was wrong. But she waited. She waited until I was so deep into the construction of a story about who she was that any request, when it came, would seem not like a request, but like a problem I was lucky to be positioned to solve. The first request came at the end of the 3rd week, on the morning of the day before my flight home. She was quiet at breakfast. I asked what was wrong. She said nothing. She was just sad I was leaving. I said I was sad too, and I meant it. She said, "Can I tell you something?" And I said, of course. She said her sister, she had told me about her sister over the previous weeks, a 17-year-old named Grace, who was trying to finish high school. Her sister's school fees were overdue, and the school had told the family that if the fees weren't paid by the end of the month, Grace would have to drop out. And Belle's mother had been trying to come up with the money but couldn't, and Belle didn't know what to do. She said this with tears in her eyes. She said, "I don't want you to think I'm telling you this because I want something from you. I just needed to tell someone." The total was 12,000 pesos, about $220. I gave it to her before she finished explaining. She cried. She said I didn't have to. She said she would pay me back. She said she wished she hadn't said anything. I said it was nothing. I flew home the next day. I cried on the plane. I was 58 years old, and I was crying on a plane because I was leaving a woman I had known for 3 weeks. We talked every day after I got back to Montana. Video calls, text messages, voice notes. She sent me photos of her day, the market, her little apartment, meals she'd cooked, her sister studying at a desk. She sent me a photo of her mother, a small woman in her 50s, standing in front of a house with a tin roof, waving at the camera. She told me the house was where she'd grown up, in a province I'd never heard of, and that her mother still lived there, and that the roof leaked, and the plumbing was bad, and they'd been saving for years to fix it, but something always came up. Her sister's school, her mother's blood pressure medication, her own dental work. She did not ask me for money for the house. She just described the house. I was the one who brought it up. I said, "How much would it cost to fix the roof?" She said she didn't know. I said, "Find out." She found out. The estimate was the equivalent of about $3,400. I sent it the next day. This is how it works. I need to stop the story and explain this because I want you to understand the mechanism. Because the mechanism is not complicated and it is not sophisticated, and it is not something only a genius con artist could pull off. The mechanism is simply this. She never asked, and I always offered. Every single transfer I made to her over the next 2.5 years, I made because I had asked what was wrong, and she had told me, reluctantly, and I had offered to help, and she had resisted, and I had insisted, and she had tearfully accepted. Every single one. The bar for a direct request was never crossed, because it didn't have to be. I was so eager to be the man who solved her problems that I solved them before she could request the solution. And every time I did it, I felt good about myself, felt like I was being a man again, felt like I had found, after 3 years of uselessness, something I was useful for. Over the next 6 months, I transferred her about $18,000. The roof, her mother's medication, her sister's tuition for the next semester, a motorbike, because she told me she was walking 40 minutes to work and it wasn't safe at night, a laptop, because she said she wanted to start studying English online so she could speak better with me. A payment to her landlord because her rent had gone up. Dental work for her mother. New glasses for her sister. Each request, each non-request, fit inside a larger narrative of a family that was finally, after years of poverty, being lifted into something like stability by a man who loved them. I was that man. I wanted to be that man. The wanting was the product. I went back in September of that first year. 2 weeks. I stayed in her apartment this time instead of a hotel. The apartment was small and clean and had a single bed and a small kitchen and a window that looked out onto a narrow street where a rooster crowed every morning at 4:30. She took the bed. I slept on a mattress on the floor. She said it was because her neighbors were very religious and would talk if they thought we were sleeping together, and I thought that was sweet, the specific kind of conservative, family-oriented concern that I had decided was her fundamental character. I slept on that mattress for 14 nights. I flew home. I sent another $8,000 over the next 3 months. Her mother had been hospitalized for pneumonia. Her sister had been accepted to a nursing program that required an enrollment fee. Her aunt had died, and the funeral cost more than expected. I went back in February. 3 weeks this time. And it was during this trip, on the 10th day, that I met the man I need to tell you about, because meeting this man was my chance to get out, and I didn't take it. And I want you to understand exactly how a man can be shown the door out of his own destruction and choose to stay inside. I was having breakfast at a small cafe near Belle's apartment. She'd gone to see her sister that morning, she said, and I was alone, reading on my phone, drinking coffee. At the next table was a man about my age, American, in a faded blue t-shirt and cargo shorts, and he looked over at me and said, "First time?" I said, "No, third." He said, "Angeles City." I said, "Yes." He said, "Bar girl or freelancer?" I said, and I remember the exact pause, the exact moment I considered lying and decided not to. I said, "Bar girl, but she's different." He laughed. He laughed for what felt like a long time. Not a cruel laugh, a tired laugh. The laugh of a man who has heard the sentence, "she's different," hundreds of times and has said it himself more than once. He introduced himself. His name was Pete. He was from Arizona. He'd been coming to Angeles for 15 years, he said, and he'd lived there full-time for the last 4. He'd been married twice, once to an American, once to a Filipina, and both marriages had ended, and he was, he said, retired from marriage. He asked me about Belle. I told him about her. I told him about her family, her sister, her mother, the roof, the motorbike, the hospitalization. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I was done, he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "Walter, how much have you sent her total?" I did the math in my head. I told him, roughly $26,000 across about 8 months, not counting what I'd spent on the trips themselves. Pete nodded. He took a long drink of his coffee. He said, "I'm going to tell you something and you're not going to believe me. And that's fine, because I didn't believe it either when someone told me, but I'm going to tell you anyway because I know what this ends like and I've watched it end that way for a lot of guys and I'm tired of watching it." He said, "Your girlfriend has at least 2 other boyfriends." He said it flat, no hedging. He said, "I don't know who she is specifically, but I know the pattern. The ones who don't ask, the ones who wait 3 weeks before the first request, the ones whose family has a specific series of escalating crises that always cost between $200 and $4,000. Those are the ones running 3 or 4 guys at once, not because they're evil, because the math works. One guy like you, she can extract about 30 to 50,000 a year if she plays it right. 4 guys like you, she can pull in 150, 200. At that rate, she retires in 4 years and never has to sit in a bar again." I told Pete he was wrong. I told him Belle was different. I told him about the cousin at the restaurant, about the way she'd waited 3 weeks, about the sister's school, about how she'd never directly asked me for anything. Pete listened to all of it. When I was done, he said, "Walter, everything you just described is the textbook. Every single thing," he said. "I'm not telling you this to be cruel. I'm telling you because you still have your retirement. Most guys by the time they hear this have already lost it. You still have time. Go home, stop sending money. Don't come back for at least 6 months. If she's real, she'll still be there. If she's not, she'll find another customer within a week, and you'll know." I thanked him. I paid my check. I walked back to Belle's apartment. Belle was home from seeing her sister or wherever she had actually been, and she asked how my morning was, and I told her it was fine, and I didn't mention Pete. I didn't mention any of it. I spent the rest of the trip with her, and I flew home at the end of the 3 weeks, and I did not stop sending money. I did not take a break. I did not test her, because testing her would have meant admitting that there was something to test, and admitting there was something to test would have meant admitting that the entire structure I had built my post-Diane emotional life around might be made of nothing. And at 59 years old, 3.5 years after burying my wife, I was not capable of that admission. The cost of Pete being right was higher than the cost of Pete being wrong. So I chose, with full consciousness, to act as if Pete were wrong. This is the part of the story that is the hardest to tell, because this is the part where I want you to understand that I was not stupid, and I was not blind, and I was not naive. I knew something was off. I had known since Pete, and probably before Pete. In little moments I had chosen not to examine the way Belle's phone would light up at odd hours and she would turn it face down. The way there were weeks when she was harder to reach and other weeks when she was always available. The way her sister's educational crisis kept evolving into new crises that all cost money. The way the mother's medical problems seemed to cycle through different conditions with different price tags. I knew. I just chose not to know. And the choosing is what I want you to understand, because the choosing is the actual mechanism by which men like me destroy their lives. It is not that we are fooled. It is that we collaborate in our own fooling because the alternative is unbearable. Over the next 18 months, I sent her approximately $290,000. I need to say that number out loud because it's the number that I still can't quite believe when I look at it. $290,000 over 18 months, on top of the $26,000 from the first 8 months. $316,000 total. It went in stages. The first escalation was when she told me, about 2 months after my February trip, that her uncle, an uncle I had never heard of before, had been in a motorcycle accident and needed surgery on his spine, and the family had to come up with about $8,000 within a week, or he would be paralyzed. I sent it. The uncle recovered. I never met the uncle. 3 months later, her mother was diagnosed with a heart condition and needed a procedure that cost $18,000. I sent it. The mother recovered. 2 months after that, her sister was accepted into a nursing program in Manila that required a deposit and 6 months of housing and tuition paid up front, totaling $22,000. I sent it. The sister attended the program, or so Belle told me. and sent me occasional videos of herself in a nursing uniform that I now suspect was a costume rented for the purpose. The biggest transfer came in the second year. Belle told me that her family's house, the one with the roof I had fixed, was going to be seized by the bank because of a loan her late father had taken out decades earlier that was finally coming due. To prevent the seizure, the family needed to pay off the balance, which was the equivalent of about $94,000. I asked questions. I asked to see the loan documents. She sent me documents. The documents were in Tagalog. I had them translated by a service online. The documents looked legitimate. I now know that the documents were forged, or rather, that they were real documents, from a real bank foreclosure involving different people, with names and figures altered. I sent the $94,000. I drained my money market account to do it. I told myself it was a one-time thing, the final big problem, after which the family would be stable and I could stop worrying. 3 months later, there was another big problem. Then another. Then another. I sold the house in Bozeman in the spring of the third year. I told my daughters I was downsizing. I told them I was moving to a condo. I did move to a condo. A small one. A temporary one. While I figured out my next step. The house sold for $341,000. After I paid off what I still owed on it and handled the transaction costs, I had about $310,000 in cash. I sent about $220,000 of that to Belle over the next 7 months. The rest went to living expenses and, in the final stretch, to a one-way ticket to Manila. Because by that point I had decided with the absolute clarity of a man who has lost the ability to see any other option that I would move to the Philippines permanently, marry Belle, and live the rest of my life there. I did not tell my daughters this. I did not tell my brother. I did not tell anyone. I told myself that I would tell them after I arrived, after the marriage, after the thing was done and couldn't be undone by their protests. I booked the ticket for the first week of October, a Tuesday, a one-way from Bozeman to Seattle to Manila. I packed 2 suitcases. I closed my bank accounts. I had at that point about $11,000 to my name and my Social Security, which was enough, I had calculated, to live on in the Philippines for a year or more while Belle and I got settled. 2 days before my flight, my younger daughter, Sarah, called me. She called me at 7 in the morning. She said, "Dad, I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" I said yes. She drove up from her place. She had moved to Billings by then for a job, and she sat in my kitchen in the condo and she said, "Dad, are you seeing someone?" I said, "What?" She said, "Are you seeing a woman in the Philippines?" And she named Belle. I said, "How do you know about that?" She said, "I hired someone." My daughter had hired a private investigator. She had hired him 2 months earlier, after I had been evasive on the phone about why I was selling the house, and after my brother had told her that he was worried about me and didn't know why, and after she had looked at my credit card statements, which I had, stupidly, left accessible through a shared family account I had forgotten about and seen the pattern of international transfers. She had hired a firm in Los Angeles that specialized in this specific thing. They had sent an investigator to Angeles City. The investigator had spent 3 weeks there. He had produced a report, which Sarah had printed, and which she slid across the kitchen table to me. I want to tell you what was in the report because it is important. Belle's real name was not Annabelle. Her real name was something else that I will not say here, because she has children, and I don't want to damage them further than they have already been damaged by being born to a mother in that specific line of work. She was 34 years old, not 26 as she had told me. She was not from the province she had told me she was from. Her mother was not sick and had never been sick. Her mother was in fact a 57-year-old woman who ran a small convenience store in a different province entirely and was in good health. She had no sister named Grace. She had 2 children of her own, a boy of 12 and a girl of 9. Who lived with their grandmother, Belle's actual mother, and whom Belle visited once a month. She had a long-term boyfriend, a Filipino man, a mechanic, who knew about the foreigners and tolerated them because they were Belle's income source. She had, at the time the investigation took place, 3 active foreign boyfriends, a man from Norway and a man from Australia. There had been, in the 3 years before me, At least 4 others that the investigator had been able to identify from her social media history and interviews with women who had worked with her in the bars. The uncle with the spinal surgery did not exist. The bank foreclosure had been a fabrication. The translated documents were real but belonged to a different family entirely. The roof I had paid to fix had never been fixed. And in fact, the house in the photographs was not her family's house but a neighbor's. The nursing program her sister was attending was not real. The aunt whose funeral I had paid for had not died. The investigator had interviewed her. The house I had lived inside in my head for 3 years, the family, the struggle, the woman I was lifting out of poverty with my generosity, was a set. It was a production. It had been built, piece by piece, by a professional, and it had been built for me, around me, and I had paid for every nail. Sarah watched me read the report. When I was done, she said, "Dad, tell me you didn't book a ticket to move there." I told her I had. She started crying. She said, "How much have you sent her?" I told her, the number, out loud, for the first time. She put her head in her hands. She said, "Dad, the house." I said, "I know." She said, "The retirement." I said, "I know." She said, "Everything." I said, "I know." I want to tell you what Sarah did next, because my daughter saved my life. She did not yell at me. She did not tell me I was stupid. She did not ask how I could have been so blind. She stood up and she walked around the table and she put her arms around me and she held me while I cried. I cried like I had cried on the plane home from that first trip, except this time I was crying because I finally understood what I had been crying about on that plane, which was that I had been alone for 3 years, and I had found something that made the aloneness stop, and I had been willing to destroy everything I had and everything I was to keep it going. And now the thing was gone. It had never existed, and the aloneness was going to come back, and I did not know if I could survive it a second time. Sarah canceled my flight. She made me sit at the kitchen table while she called the airline. She called Rebecca in Denver. She called my brother. She called the firm in Los Angeles that had done the investigation, and she arranged for them to send me the full report and the supporting evidence. She stayed in the condo with me for 4 days. On the second day, I got a message from Belle asking where I was. I had been out of contact for almost 36 hours by then, the longest I had gone in 3 years, and Sarah sat with me while I read the message, and then she took my phone and turned it off and put it in a drawer. I never responded to that message. I never spoke to Belle again. 3 days later, she sent a series of increasingly worried messages through different channels, WhatsApp, Messenger, email, and then, when those got no response, a series of increasingly angry messages. And then, when those got no response, silence. About 10 days after that, I got a message from a new number, a different woman, claiming to be Belle's cousin, saying Belle was in the hospital and urgently needed help. I did not respond. About 3 weeks after that, the messages stopped entirely. I assume she moved on to her next customer. I hope her Norwegian is doing all right. I hope her Australian has a daughter like mine. The recovery has taken 3 years and is not finished. I sold the condo because I couldn't afford it. I moved to the apartment in Billings I mentioned at the beginning. I took a part-time consulting job with an engineering firm, working about 20 hours a week, which brings in enough, combined with my Social Security, to cover my expenses. I eat well enough. I have the truck, which I managed to keep. I see my daughters more often now than I did before they drive up on weekends. Or I drive down. And we do the ordinary things that I stopped being able to enjoy when Diane died, and that I can slowly enjoy again now. I have not dated since. I am not sure I ever will. I have a therapist, a woman in Billings who specializes in grief and trauma, who has walked me through the specific shame of this in a way that has allowed me to keep waking up every morning. I go to a support group. It meets every other Thursday for men who have been through this specific thing. There are more of us than you would think. There are so many more of us than you would think. I want to say some things directly to you, the person watching this, because I do not want to have lost $316,000 in a house in 3 years of my life for nothing, and the only way that loss becomes anything other than waste is if it helps one man not become me. If you are a widower or divorced, and alone, and considering a trip to Angeles City, or Cebu, or Manila, or Subic, or any of the places that the internet will tell you are full of warm and friendly women who will make your loneliness go away for cheap, I am not telling you not to go. I am not your father, and I am not a preacher, and it is not my place to tell a grown man what to do with his vacation time. I am telling you this. The architecture of those places is designed to separate you from your money. And the most sophisticated version of that architecture is not a scam in the traditional sense. It is a relationship, or what feels like one, that extracts resources from you over years while leaving you convinced that you are the one in control. The women who run this long game are not cartoon villains. They are professionals with families and bills and calculations about how many years of this work they need to do before they can stop. You are a revenue stream to them. The feeling of love you have for them is real, on your side. On theirs, it is a job. The job is performed well. That is why it works. If a woman in one of these places has not asked you for money in the first few weeks, that is not evidence that she is different. That is evidence that she is good at her job. The women who ask for money on the first night are amateurs. The women who wait 3 weeks before a tearful, reluctant, quickly withdrawn first request are running the long program. The long program is the expensive one. It is the one that ends in lost houses and drained retirement accounts and one-way tickets that daughters have to cancel. If a man you meet in one of these places, a Pete, an expat who has been there long enough to have watched this arc play out many times, tells you that your situation is not unique, believe him. Do not explain to him why your girlfriend is different. She is not different. She is good. Goodness is her product. The product is not a person. If you have already sent money, you are not stupid. Stop sending it. The money you have already sent is gone. The money you have not yet sent is still yours. The hardest thing in this situation is to stop without a resolution, without confronting her, without hearing her admit it, without getting closure. There is no closure available. Professional con women do not give closure. They move on. And you have to move on without any of the emotional endings that a real relationship would have provided. This is unfair, and it is also the situation. If you have a daughter, or a son, or a brother, or a friend who you suspect is going through something like this, please do what Sarah did for me. Hire the investigator. Confront the person. Cancel the flight. Do not tell yourself that it is not your place. My daughter saved my life. She did it by being willing to be the person who embarrassed me and forced me to confront something I was incapable of confronting alone. I will owe her for the rest of my life. And I would not be sitting in this apartment recording this if she had not had the courage to sit across my kitchen table 3 years ago and slide a manila envelope across the table and make me read what was inside. And if you are watching this and you are recently widowed or divorced, and you are sitting in a house that is too quiet, and you are scrolling through the internet at night looking at things you know you shouldn't be looking at, and you are telling yourself that nobody understands the specific loneliness you are in, and that you need something different, something that the people around you can't provide, I understand. I was you. And I am telling you, from the other side of 3 years of destruction and slow rebuilding, that there is no shortcut out of that loneliness. The loneliness is real, and it is bad, and it cannot be solved by flying to a place where the lights are bright and the women are beautiful and the prices are low. Those things will not cure your loneliness. They will use your loneliness as fuel. The loneliness has to be gone through, not around. And the going through is slow and painful, and it requires the specific, unglamorous work of talking to a therapist and going to a grief group and eating dinner with your family and, eventually, letting time do the thing that time does when you let it. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 61 years old. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Billings, Montana. I had everything, and I gave it all away to a woman who did not exist. And I am still here, and I am still breathing. And I am telling you this because I want at least one man to hear it before he books the flight instead of after he has already lost the house. If that man is you, please listen. Please do not be me. Please call your daughter, or your son, or your brother, or your friend, and tell them what you are thinking about doing, and let them love you enough to stop you. That is the only protection that works. Everything else, the advice forums, the cost comparisons, the tactical knowledge about how the bars operate, none of it saved me. Only my daughter saved me. Find the person who can be your Sarah. Let them be her. And if you have already lost what I lost, I will tell you what my therapist told me in our first session, which I did not believe then and which I now know is true. You are still here. The life ahead of you is shorter than it would have been and smaller than it would have been. But it is a life, and it is yours, and it is worth living. Get up, eat something, call someone, go outside. The aloneness will not kill you if you let the people who love you in. And the people who love you are still there, still waiting, still hoping you will pick up the phone. That is what I know. That is what this story is for. My name is Walter Hensley, and thank you for listening.